Hello, it's Blue Orange 22. So I'm in the middle of my series on male privilege and the young male crisis. I just did a video on the education gap, and I'm going to be doing the next video on the education gap tomorrow. But in this video, I just want to talk about something. You can see in the title, I get messages from teenage boys who say, they read my Reddit accounts, they read my Reddit posts, they watch my videos, and they agree with the things that I'm saying, and they notice these things happening to them, like in their lives, like at school or at work, but they feel like they're too afraid to say it, and they say things like, me and my friends, like we talk about this stuff, like we notice this stuff, but I feel like I have to lie to my parents. I have to lie to my teachers. Like I can't be open about being an MRA or like talking about men's issues. I had even had one person say like they tried talking to their parents about like, being an MRA and like some men's issues, and they completely freaked out. Like their parents like got really, really angry, screaming at them and saying, no, they're sexist, they're fascist, they're alt-right and all that kind of stuff. And basically that he had to lie, and that he's still lying now, because if he says it, he'll almost get in trouble. And that's a really common thing, and we get posts like that on the men's rights subreddit all the time, from teenage boys or like guys in college who are like saying, we notice this stuff happening, and like this stuff is happening to us, a lot. Like, we'll hear stuff like, at our high school, like it's normal for girls to like, punch their boyfriends or like, beat up their boyfriends, but like, we can't say anything. Or like, teachers just said this like completely sexist thing, or they're always being sexist against boys, or like, talking about hating men, but it's like no one cares, we can't say anything. Or like something happens at work, or they were discriminated against, or, whatever it is. Like they're noticing it, but they feel like they can't say anything, or they can't talk about it, even with their family, even with their parents. And so what do? Well, they go online. They go to places like the men's rights subreddit, and like they can't talk to their dad about stuff like this, so who do they talk to? Well, they talk to people like me. They go on MRA blogs or MRA sites and talk about this kind of stuff. Because the thing is, like, with the men's rights movement and the issues that we talk about, is these things are actually happening. Like, boys are actually being affected by this in their real lives, in the real world. And especially, I can imagine if you're a teenage boy today, you've always grown up like in a very hostile, toxic environment, for boys, for men. You've always heard like kind of, negative stereotypes against men, and like negative portrayals about men, toxic masculinity, male privilege, and just nonstop kind of negative, kind of toxic attitudes towards boys kind of your entire life. And then you go to high school and you learn about male privilege and feminism and all that kind of stuff, but you look around and then you go, wait a minute, that's not really what I'm seeing. I'm seeing boys are, getting lower grades. Boys are less likely to graduate high school. They're less likely to go to college. They're less likely to be employed, more likely to be unemployed. They're more likely to be homeless. They're more likely to be in prison. They die younger, and they get less health funding, less health research, and less access to health programs. In some countries, boys are conscripted and they have to join the military against their will. In some countries, boys have men have higher pension ages, and they have to work until an older age before they can retire. All over the world, male victims of domestic violence or rape are basically mocked and, not taken seriously. But then they hear these messages about equality and feminism and male privilege, and it just doesn't match the experience that they're getting in the real world. They're seeing their sisters or their female peers becoming more successful, and meanwhile, they don't get the same access to scholarships. They're not getting the same jobs, and they're always just given negative feedback, and it's very confusing. And so where do they turn? Where do they go? They go to places like the men's rights movement, or like on the internet, like these so-called alt-right sites or Jordan Peterson-like sites or whatever it is, because that's the only place where they seem to be able to talk. By the way, I have linked my Reddit accounts in the description below. I submit almost daily a lot of the same stuff I make videos about, a lot of other stuff too. I also did a video a few months back. Why is your son becoming an MRA/alt-rights? And I linked that as well. And I do say in the video, I'll say again now, the men's rights movement is not really part of the alt-rights, but they're often kind of lumped in together. And a lot of times, if you end up looking for the men's rights movement online and you're trying to find a place you can talk about it, some of the communities where you can talk about the men's rights movement without being criticized, they get labeled alt-right just because, oh, they're talking about men's rights. So but you'll see in that video kind of what I'm talking about there. But I get messages regularly from teenage boys who are saying this kind of stuff. Like, they can't even talk to their families about it, but they are noticing it, and it is happening. And I can't help, I keep thinking about, I've talked about this before, that little boy at the Women's March. If you've seen my videos on the Women's March, I didn't get this on video, but something that happened is there was a family there, a husband and a wife, and there was a 16-year-old daughter with a sign marching, and they had their 8-year-old son with them. And so I was asking them, well, you're marching for gender equality, you have a son, what do you know about the gender gap in education? Like, boys doing worse in school, boys getting lower grades in every subject at every age, boys being less likely to finish high school and less likely to go to college. I mean, you're here marching for equality, but what do you think about that? And they had no idea about that. They had never heard of it before. And in fact, they didn't believe me when I first said it, and they were really skeptical because they saw my sign saying men's rights. And they were like, oh, so you're against my daughter going to school, or against my daughter having... That's the perception that they had of the men's rights movement. And it wasn't until I took out my phone and I started like showing them these links, some of the links that you would have seen in the last video about the education gap, that they realized what I was talking about. And they were completely shocked. Like, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Like, they couldn't believe that this was real. But of course it was. And they had never heard of it before. And like, their whole perception right then like changed on what the men's rights movement is and the stuff that I was saying. I don't think I totally convinced them to like be MRAs, but even the sister who said she was a hardcore feminist, when she read this stuff, she was surprised, because she had never read it before. And it's not something that a lot of people are even aware of. So when people hear, oh, men's rights, what is that? What are you talking about? And they had this negative idea. They think, oh, you're misogynists, you're sexists, you're fascists, you're right-wing, whatever it is. That's just not true. And a lot of teenage boys, including your teenage sons, or you, if you're one of those boys, they're noticing this stuff in real life because it's actually happening to them in real life. And so when they try and talk to people about it and they get rebuffed or they get attacked or criticized for it, where do you expect them to go? Who do you expect them to talk to? They're going to look this stuff up. They're going to find other guys saying the same thing. And it's going to be something like the men's rights movement. It's going to be someone like me. So anyway, I'm going to have my next video on the education gap either tomorrow or the next day. And then I'm going to be continuing the series on the young male crisis, looking at employment, homelessness, home ownership, and all the kind of socioeconomic stats of today. But anyway, I posted a link to my Reddit accounts if you want to browse through that, and a video. Let me know what you